Also continuing a series that we started last week called Freely and Lightly, God, Me, and Money. And looking out this morning, I see some of you came back. It's great. A lot of new faces as well, and that's amazing. A warm welcome to you. And I would encourage you to go back and listen to last week's message. I don't always say this, but for this series in particular, it's especially important to get a sense of the foundation we laid for this series last week in order to understand where we're going to today. And the heart of this series of last week especially was that when it comes to the money conversation, it's a heart matter, and that is actually why our backs go up the walls sometimes when we hear that someone's going to talk about money, and especially in church. And the message was really simple. We have to first check our heart and ask why we respond that way, why we react that way, and how we view money. And again, last week we talked about, number one, just kind of resting in our hearts that it's not a source of greed in our lives, because that's going to drown out the contentment and gratitude that Jesus intends for us to have and live with. And number two, making sure that money and possessions don't hold our hearts more than Jesus, because Jesus needs to be the main thing. And the reason why Jesus often spoke to this matter, and the reason why he talked about money more than faith and prayer combined, is because we believe that he knew our hearts, he knows who we are as people, and he knew that few subjects would take us to places in our heart that this conversation can. It's a heart matter. It's a good show, by the way, Heart Matters, in case you haven't watched. It's a heart matter. And it's hard to talk about. And we recognize this morning that this kind of message and conversation can sometimes leave us with a sense of shame and guilt, and that's what we're not about today. But it can also leave us with this overwhelming sense of anxiety and worry. And in all this, the invitation, the reason for the title of the series, Freely and Lightly, is this. Jesus says in Matthew 11, quoting the paraphrased version of the scriptures this morning, "Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly." We've been singing about that idea of freedom this morning, and we believe as a church that this can be possible even in the area of finances. And we acknowledge, like we talked about last week, that oftentimes our first reaction when it comes to this subject is worry. I had this fascinating story I heard this week of this global expert who actually coaches corporate executive CEOs, and that's who they mentor, who they spend their time with. And they were in a workshop, and again, with all CEOs that make a lot of money, the person leading the workshop said, "I want you to physically show me and demonstrate for me how money makes you feel." And you know what they did? The majority of the people in that room, CEOs of large corporations, got on the ground and curled up in the fetal position. That would be how a lot of us feel when it comes to this subject. And we're not just worried. I think the struggle is legitimately real, and it's one of those things that can make you feel like you're all alone. And one of the things I want to share this morning is just this reminder, encouragement that when it comes to this, you're not alone. You're not alone. I was watching a video that CTV shared a couple weeks ago that talked about the current financial situation that Canadians live and deal with. Said that 82% of Canadians are currently worried about inflation. That would be a lot of hands in this room this morning if we were to be true and speak to the subject. And no, I didn't do this series because I knew Trump was taking presidency and the tariffs were one of those things. But I just want to acknowledge this morning that I've heard a couple things about that in the last 24 hours. And that's how we feel about it, right? It's like the worry, it's the uncertainty, it's the anxiety. 44% think that their finances are going to get worse this year. 25% think that they're not going to be able to pay all their bills this year. In December alone, there was a 65% increase in the number of people who did a debt cancellation program. Reports continue to suggest that money issues are the top reasons that couples break up. It's worth considering for our church demographic today that overall, younger adults, and they define younger adults as age 25 to 44, so some of you love me for saying that this morning because you're like, I thought it was a 30 thing, but I'm in my early 40s and I'm a young adult. That's cool. It's cool. They suggest that younger adults are actually struggling more financially than older Canadians, which I actually wouldn't have made that assumption. That younger adults, about half in this age range, report to having experienced high financial stress, and that a quarter of these people could see themselves using a food bank or a community organization in this year. Within the last 6 months, so many more Canadians are living closer to or below the poverty line, and things are shifting, especially in our own country. Lastly, a few findings from a consumer debt survey. You can go to the next slide. 1 in 5 Canadians plan to take on more debt in 2025. 43% plan to apply for a new credit card. And then the last slide on this kind of intro this morning, 71% plan to reduce spending. Anyone have that as like a New Year's resolution this year? Few. 36% say they want to build up savings. 33% say that they want to pay down debt. I think these three ideas are a great natural segue to our teaching this morning. And all this, I kind of want to start with a question. When it comes to all that we're hearing right now in this current financial moment within our culture, the question is this: do you think that's how God intends for us to live? No. That's my answer too. And so I want to take a moment today to cast vision on a better way that leads to this idea of freely and lightly, where you can have a life where managing money actually feels less like a burden and more like a liberating experience, and it's actually possible. I want to jump back into the text we were last week in Matthew 6, where Jesus says this. I actually brought extra contacts this morning because when I put my contacts in on Friday, they seem blurry. This is a little rabbit trail because that's how my brain works. And I thought it was my eyes. I thought it were tired eyes because sometimes that happens. So I rested my eyes from contacts the last couple of days. I went to someone's house yesterday. Actually, it was Dave and Tara's house. And Dave was like, "You look so different." It's the glasses. I don't ever wear them. I probably overwear my contacts. But I took an extra pair to church this morning just in case. And during the first service, I was not seeing anything. So I can see very good right now because I have fresh contacts in. And I couldn't read my Bible. That's why I'm sharing this, is because I actually couldn't read my Bible in the first service. I couldn't see it. I don't know why they make these things so small. But anyways, Matthew 6. We read this last week, and I want to unpack it a little bit more this week. Jesus says this: "Do not store up treasures for yourself on earth where moth and vermin destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness?" And he ends this thought by saying this: "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other." And then he names these two realities. You cannot serve both God and money. As I said last week, Jesus isn't trying to make us feel bad or put us down. He's simply defining a reality and letting us know that we can't live in a both-and world. And whatever way you want to shake it today, I think there's truth in what Jesus is saying. Your heart is always going to try and follow your treasure. Your heart's always going to try and follow your wallet. And I would say to you this morning, just as an experiment, if you want to care about something more deeply, invest in it. Invest in it. And the more you invest, the more invested you will be. Why? Because your heart follows your treasure. I use a terrible illustration in the first service. I borderline probably shouldn't do it again, but I'm going to go there. I despise the Montreal Canadiens. And I know half the church just left and half are clapping. It's what happens. But I don't recommend gambling. But if I were to put some money on the Montreal Canadiens, I bet you there would be a part of me that wants them to win because I've got something invested in that. Don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying go home and try this. I'm just saying, using it as an example. Why? Jesus says your heart follows that which you value. It's just the way of life. And watch how Jesus draws a line in the sand and moves from this. He says, your heart follows your treasure, but then notice the eyes of the lamp kind of verse, and eyes in the way of the Jewish thought of this day was a way of referencing the heart. Your heart follows what you let into your life. Jesus is not saying that your heart follows your treasure. He's also saying that your heart follows your attention, where you look, where you focus. And number 3, your heart follows your master. He kind of views these sequentially, where the ultimate climax is this question: who is going to be your master? And I just love the genius of Jesus in this. What you treasure is what you give your attention to, and what you give your attention to will be your master. And when you consider that in light of like what everything is, all the things that come at us in the day-to-day life, is it any surprise that we have a hard time being formed more and more in the image of Jesus? If you take a moment today just to consider the ads, the number of ads we see on a day-to-day basis is like crazy. I don't even want to say the number. But remember when before there were ads, there were commercials? Anyone remember that? I don't know, like my grandparents, they were so godly, they muted the commercials because you might hear bad things. But before ads, there were commercials. And then we all moved to subscription-based media because we didn't want the commercials. You see where we're going with this? But now if you just pay $10 more per month, you don't have to watch the ads or you get shorter ads. And has it ever occurred to us, I was struck by this thought this week, that maybe we're the product? That maybe we're what they're after? That all these ads that promise treasure, that summon our attention, want something from us, they want us? A few weeks ago, Lucas, the intern who's upstairs teaching the preteens, doing intern things this morning, was at our house for supper, and we had YouTube on. We were just, I don't know, watching a moose hunting video or something, or watching someone survive in the wilderness. I do weird things like that. And all throughout this video, depending on the length of the video, ads continually cut in. And I'm continually going through this wrestle. Am I going to just give them the $10 a month and not have the ads, or just continue to be cheap? I'm going to continue to be cheap. But when the ads cut in, I started realizing how loud they were. And like, we have a really old TV. Don't judge me for this, but I'm too cheap to buy a new one. And the remote doesn't work because it's so old. So we actually had to get up and walk across the room to turn the volume up and down. Some of you that was like, you're like, that's my childhood. Well, it's the struggle I have right now. And it's just like, you had the volume up and then the ad comes on and it's blaring loud. And I said out loud, why are the ads so loud? Everyone noticed this before? And Lucas said, I don't know if he's just genius or if he learned it, he's pretty smart, said it's so that you look up from your phone. I'm watching YouTube on TV, and yet YouTube knows that it needs to boost the volume of the ad to get my attention back from my phone, even though I'm supposed to be giving it my attention. Isn't that crazy? That's wild. And things that value our attention, things that come at our attention, might just be the most troubling things that we face in this time. They used to say that time is our biggest commodity. I think it's attention now. Because it's like, are you going to give someone all of your time and all of your attention, or just a little bit and no attention? And I think Jesus is making these connections, drawing these dots where, again, he's kind of pointing us down this road. As someone else has once said, money is a great tool or it's a great servant, but it's a terrible master. And I like what Jesus was getting at. He names it, like, you cannot serve God and money. And that seems intense, but why would he name that? Because money is a terrible master. It gives orders. It bosses us around. If we have our priorities right as followers of Jesus, there is only one master, and that is God himself. And that's why Jesus just speaks to reality. Your heart follows your treasure. Your heart follows your attention. Your heart follows your master. And how we spend or save our money reveals our heart and reflects our relationship with God. And that's why we started the way we did last week. This is the genius of Jesus saying, do not store up treasures for yourself on earth. Store up treasures in the heart. I think Jesus would say it this way: don't let your heart follow your treasure. Let your treasure follow your heart. See the shift? I think this is why there's over 800 scriptures about money and possessions. That God himself would have a game plan for the way we live and spend and save. And when we follow its teachings, it helps us with all three: treasure, attention, and master. So that we can put our allegiance and our whole confidence in the right place. And the greatest gift of all in all of this is that we won't have to worry about money. And you're saying, like, is there any way that it could actually be true? Is there any way that we can actually live freely and lightly with gratitude and contentment? And Jesus says yes. He says yes. So what does that look like practically? What does it look like to not have our heart follow our treasure, but to have our treasure follow our heart? Number one, I'm going to get really practical for the next 10 minutes, is this. You need a budget or a spending plan. Some of you are like, ugh. And it's funny, I was reading this week that most people don't use the word budget anymore because it doesn't seem like warm or invitational, so they use spending plan. I don't care what word you want to use, it's the same thing, okay? Budget or spending plan. I was about 23 years old. It was 7 years ago, just in case you're doing the math. I'm turning 30 this year. It's going to be a moment in August. We'll all celebrate together. It's a milestone. I was 23 at the time. We were making $38,000 combined as a household. My wife was a full-time student. I was a full-time pastor. And someone said to me, a mentor said to me, you need, and they were kind of like forcing it, you need to have a budget. Like, do you have a budget? No, you need to have one. I'm like, why would I do something that reminds me of how bad our financial situation is every single month? It makes no sense. And I said, well, when she graduates and when she goes to work, then we'll do it. And his advice was, no, trust me, start now, and you'll be glad you did. And I'm glad I did. Little did I know that 2 years later, we would have a baby in April of 2020. That was the COVID year, in case you forgot. I would walk away from my job and step into 9 months of unemployment, and CERB was great, but it wasn't like that great. My wife would be on mat leave, and again, EI is like, it's a great program, it's a great thing, but it's not that great in light of our financial time. And you know what? While we were definitely worried and stressed out about where we would live and all these things, I would say that money was one of the things we had the least worry about the most. Because we had budgeted for a couple of years, and even when she started work, we didn't like switch our lifestyle just because we had more money. Our budget held us accountable to a Christian kind of ethic of living, and it changed our lives and solved us in that season. It's funny, one of the reasons, number one reasons that people don't want to budget is because they feel like a budget is restrictive. And it's actually not. It gives you the freedom to spend without worry on the things you need to spend money on. And it's called accountability, which is supposed to be a good thing. A budget or a spending plan helps us live with the intentionality that Jesus requires for us to have in our lives. It holds us accountable to making sure that our treasure follows our heart, not the other way around. And even when Jesus was talking about considering the cost of following him, he used an example that's really similar to this idea of a budget. He says in Luke 14, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees will ridicule you, saying this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. The biggest shock for me in budgeting and this journey, and it still remains to this day, was how much money I spent on things that do not matter, or how much money I didn't realize I was spending on things. It's like, you go to McDonald's a couple times. It happens, right? We're human. You got to do what you think. And, you drive by Mary Brown's, and like the Lord himself speaks and says it's Big Mary Monday, and you got to go in, right? That was the Lord, right? And as I would keep the receipts and do the tally and get intentional about this, I would be mind blown. Like, there's no way it was that much this month. There's no way. But a budget doesn't lie. Receipts don't lie. And it held us accountable to this idea. There's this guy, Ramit Sethi. He's a New York Times bestseller, author, podcaster. Some of you might have seen his show on Netflix called How to Get Rich. You can go to the next slide, I believe. Although it's not about like getting rich in the way we think about rich. It's a really good show. I would warn you that he's not the biggest fan of Christianity, but it's still a good show. And he's worked with millionaires, and he's worked with people who've made $30,000 a year. His show is fascinating for this reason. And if you watch it, you'll see someone making $300,000 a year, always living in debt and paycheck to paycheck and barely surviving, and someone making $60,000 a year, not living in paycheck to paycheck and more than surviving. And he would say that the number one problem that people face when it comes to money is they believe deeply that if they just had more, then everything would change. Fill in the blank, whatever that more is. And he says, I'm here to tell you that's untrue. I work with multimillionaires who still agonize over the price of blueberries. That would be me, by the way, just in case you were wondering. The first issue, he says, that couples and people have when it comes to this is, again, not knowing their basic numbers. It's a budget thing. And it doesn't mean that we're like bad people. It just means that we probably would rather sit down and watch TV than organize our finances. That's okay. But if we were to say this morning, like if we consider this area to be important, we would say yes. And if we were to say this morning, would that be a source of stress or worry in your life, we would say yes. And if we were to say, well, then what are you going to do about it, we would probably say, well, probably nothing, maybe tomorrow. We've got to get intentional about this. And you can't do this without basic numbers and a basic understanding. Number two, he says that people don't pay attention to it. Number three, he says they want someone to rescue them, somebody, anybody except themselves. And he says, my message is no one is coming to rescue you. And by the way, you can do a much better job than you think is possible. So again, the biggest challenge with this is simply intentionality of doing the hard work and putting in the time and effort to do this, but it's worth it. Like there's so many things that the scriptures tell us are worth it on the other side of effort and intentionality. We just got to get there. Consider Proverbs 27:23. Be sure to know the condition of your flocks. Give careful attention to your herds. Now, some of you are like, I got no flocks, I got no herds at home. But the principle applies to money. And what the proverb is saying here, what this book of wisdom is saying here is this. If we don't manage our money, our lack of managing money will always manage us. And we've got to learn to budget. Hey, you can go to the next slide. There's this app that I use. You can use it on a computer, an iPad, an iPhone. Android users, I'm sure you're included as well. I just don't know anything about that world. It's a free app. It's actually created by a Christian financial person. I can't recommend this enough. I've been doing it for 7 years. It's been life-changing. And it helps you track every dollar so that you can ensure that every dollar is spent intentionally. Highly recommend that. Number 2 this morning, there's this principle from the scriptures of living on less than what we make. And I know the first objection is like, well, I can barely make it with what I make, so how can I live on less? And that might spark a conversation of actually having that conversation. Maybe you do need to consider that and to consider your work situation and income situation. But I think the larger thing for the majority of this is that this is a heart matter once again. I think true contentment is hard to cultivate if we do not develop this important discipline of living on less than what we make. Financial anxiety can be a result of an unexpected event or circumstances. I've experienced that. But it can also be a result of bad spending habits and confusing our needs and wants. And living on less means self-control. And yes, that is still a fruit of the Spirit, self-control, which helps us prepare for the unexpected, which helps us keep those needs and wants in check. As we talked about last week, what do we truly need? We need food, clothing, and shelter. And maybe deodorant. Like I'm willing to throw that one in, even though the Bible doesn't talk about it. It's kind of a big one for me. Although I panicked because you ever see that list going around about like what to buy today and what not, because like the Canadian-US thing. And Dove deodorant is like my favorite. I've been there for 15 years. It's an American thing, and I'm really struggling with that. I'm also struggling with Heinz ketchup and French's. Like that's where I draw the line. I think I gotta stay with the Heinz ketchup. But anyways, the happiness trap has exposed us to confuse our wants and needs in order to find contentment. And that is what this principle is about. Luke 12 says, then he said to them, watch out. This is Jesus speaking. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Again, it reinforces this truth. Our treasure following our heart, not our desires, not our wants. And living on less also ensures that our treasure follows our heart, not vice versa. Proverbs 21:20 says this, the wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down. This is speaking on living on less, but also saving money. And again, none of this is easy. None of this is easy. It's not easy. But the Bible speaks towards saving as being an important thing. Practically this morning, I think having an emergency fund in my life over the last number of years has been very good. I've shared this before. We lost every appliance last year. There were all little fixes, but the emergency fund meant that we didn't have to worry about that or stress out about that. It was covered. It was covered. And the Bible makes a compelling case for saving. Consider Proverbs 6:6-8. Go to the ant, you sluggard. I know that sounds really mean this morning. Consider its ways and be wise. He says, the ant has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores up its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. Proverbs 21:5. The plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty. And again, this is why the Bible speaks highly of accountability and discipline. Consider Hebrews 12:11. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. No budgeting seems pleasant at the time, but painful. None of these conversations seem pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Number 3 this morning, defeating your debt. I think debt is the silent killer of financial health in our time. And I think this is really one that can make us feel lonely and isolated. And I would say for a lot of us in the room this morning, it's not our fault. And just so I'm clear this morning, like I'm not over here saying like I'm living a debt-free life and shame on you. I have debt. But I would just say this morning, I've become more and more exposed to the horrible lie that is I can't live without it. I think there's a way that we can. And we live in a culture that loves debt, and banks have made it easier than ever to get what we want without waiting. And that might just be the culprit in all this. There's a solid chance today that your parents or grandparents, if you're in this room today, didn't have debt, that they didn't have credit cards. I mean, they didn't come out to the 60s. Some of my grandparents didn't even have a mortgage. And now we're where we are today. How did we get here? Why is debt so easy? I'll tell the story in pictures. You can go to the first picture. One generation had to save, go to a store and place an order. This is St. John's downtown in 1940. And the chances are you had to actually save your money, go to the store with your money, give them your money, and then they had to order it in for you. The next had to save, and then go to the store and get the thing. You can go to the next picture. This is a good throwback just to bring some nostalgia into place this morning. If you're here and you don't know what this is, you haven't seen the light. Okay, next slide. The next generation simply had to go to the store and put it on a credit card. And now we don't even have to go to the store. It comes to us, right to your door, even the next day with just 2 clicks with Apple Pay. Wow, that sounded really good. That wasn't in my notes. And we get to a point where I even seen this in December, like Canada Post was ruining our Christmas. Seriously? But again, what if we're the product in all this? What if there's a better way? And we find ourselves in this trap of thinking that there is no life unless you have a credit card or a credit card debt. It's funny how like stages of what it meant to be an adult has changed over time. Like I thought when I turned 18, becoming an adult meant getting a credit card. That's just what I inherited. And it's not like we can just have a car payment, why not have 2? And then there's the whole thing with buying too much house, and yet I'm more sensitive to that now because it's getting crazy in terms of trying to buy a home. But even when it comes to our cell phones, we don't just have the plan, we have the plan to pay for the phone, and hopefully we don't break it in 2 years so we can bring it back. Just saying, I've never been able to do that. I've lost phones in water, I've also lost phones in paint cleaner, but we'll go there another time. But just so I'm clear, nothing is wrong with luxuries. Nothing is wrong with possessions. Nothing is wrong with things unless we can afford them. I have things. But Jesus would say to us this morning, where are you storing up your treasures? And he would remind us today, this is a heart matter. Life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. And the Bible does not say that debt is sin, but it speaks to its dangers. It's not sin, but it's definitely harmful. Proverbs 22:7 says this, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. Romans 13:7-8 says, give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay them. If you owe revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. But let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. I'm saying this morning, I think this is hard, but I also think it's not impossible. And the heart of this series, again, has been about what we want for you. Like we want as a church to help people financially because money may be morally neutral, but it's a spiritual heart matter. We don't want your first thought of money to be angst and worry, but freedom and lightness. To know that you can be in control of something like that. To be able to do nice things and go on a vacation because you've stewarded your money well. And to be able to save wisely for the future. Your heart will follow your treasure, so choose where you put it. Lastly, this morning, and I'm only going to spend a moment on this because we're doing a full message on this next week. Fourthly, this morning is this, give generously. One of the greatest habits that you can do to align your heart to the kingdom of God is to cultivate gratitude and grow in your generosity. And this is just like a preview for next week. Even when we get to this one and we think this is all about what God wants from us, he just wants our money, this is actually about what God wants for us. Because he knows that being generous can free us. He knows our hearts. He knows us as people. He knows what's best for us. And he knows that when we are generous, we come alive. And when we're generous, we cultivate gratitude. And we come to life when we actually give money away. That we could actually believe what Paul says Jesus said in Acts 20:35. Truly it is more blessed to give than to receive. How many people would say, like, I really believe that this morning? I don't even know if I can put up my hand, to be quite honest with you. But this is what Jesus said, that we can find contentment and gratitude and freedom and life in this life. I'm going to invite the worship team back this morning because we're going to transition to communion, but just before we